Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War Frontline update for the 10th of March 2024. If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please check out the key on the screen at the moment. Pause the video. Right, let's move on. Before we start with the mapping update, not a lot to report on that front as well. We'll come to that and the importance of that in a second. Some big news out today, just an extra bit of news nugget. In St. Petersburg, Gorilovo, an industrial zone near the airport, is on fire, and it's pretty much at the airport as far as I can work out, or at least, yeah. There's a hangar on fire, and it is a big fire, right? A fire broke out at a hangar near the airport in St. Petersburg, according to Russian media. The emergency ministry said that 1,000 square meter hangar was on fire. This is significant because it's right next to the airport, and that shows that air defenses are possibly not working as well as they should around St. Petersburg, and that Ukrainian, one presumes this means that Ukrainian drones can make their way pretty much to the Russian airport at St. Petersburg. That is a warning shot across the bow of the Russians there, and that is today. So that is significant. I presume that's a drone. It could just be a fire. I have to say, I don't know the details. It could just be a fire at a hangar close to the airport, in which case, fair enough. But I'd have to say, there really are rather a lot of fires in Russia and have been for a couple of years. Okay, going to the Frontline update itself, you can see that there is no change to the mappers, all three mappers I refer to, along the entire Northeastern axis from Kupiansk to Svatova to Crimea. That's incredibly significant. The fact that supposedly the Russians have massed such a huge amount of forces in the area that they have been unable to make any significant advances there really for some time. There's obviously a lot of activity taking place up in Sinkivka area. And yesterday or the day before, Surat Maps claimed some advances for the Russians into Sinkivka, but haven't seen any confirmation of that. There are no advances around this Crimea area and down in Bilohorivka. That is significant, and in the Seversk area. Pierre Dupont, who I went around the front lines with Greg and Zhenya. Pierre was trying to do some humanitarian work in Seversk, and they weren't allowed in. They said it's too hot there. The drones. Pierre was saying to me that people are just starting to cycle around there because it's easier to cycle. You're not as prone to be hit by a drone as if you're driving. There were 2 civilian vehicles hit by Russian drones yesterday, and so that shows you what it's like to live in some of these areas. And also shows you that the Russians have no compunction with regard to hitting civilians with drones. We've seen that down on the Dnipro River consistently for an awful long time now. They have no problems with that. Moving on to Bakhmut, no changes there either. Ivannivka has not had change for the last couple of days. That is incredibly significant. Greg was talking about how he thinks Chasiv Yar will fall to the Russians, that the Ukrainians will fall back to this defending this crescent here. I have a feeling the Russians will have a hard time taking Chasiv Yar. I mean, he was saying they will take it just eventually. I don't know. I think the Ukrainians might put up a bit of an effort there because I think it's such an important buffer zone to that crescent. You know, if you're not fighting at Chasiv Yar, then you're fighting much closer to Konstantinivka, which means that the artillery can just hammer out Konstantinivka and Druzhkivka with much greater ease. So you want to keep that back. You've got to fight somewhere, right? And this was one of the theories about Bakhmut. If you're not fighting Bakhmut, then you're fighting Chasiv Yar, then you're fighting Konstantinivka. So why are they putting up so much effort into defending Bakhmut? It's not that operationally important or tactically important intrinsically in and of itself. So once the logistics in the area have already been compromised, what's the point of holding on to that? Well, if you're going to fix and attrit the Russian forces somewhere, you might as well do it as far forward as you can be. Because if you keep ceding territory, then you're just going to let them come and take more and more territory. And then at some point, you've got to do that fighting. Because, think about that logically. If you go, well, no, that doesn't offer too much value in itself. Let's go back to Konstantinivka. Or now that they compromised the logistics at Konstantinivka, that itself doesn't offer anymore the intrinsic value that it once did, in the same way that Bakhmut didn't. Okay, let's go back to here. Let's go back to there. Let's go back to there. Let's go back to there. And then sooner or later you're back in Kiev, and you say, well, they might as well have everything. So there is this theory that you got to fight somewhere, and you might as well have that fight as far to the east or as far to the south, depending on where you are, as you can. So my idea is that I think the Ukrainians probably will put up a big fight at Chasiv Yar, but of course you then have that same theory about why put so much effort into defending Ivanyivska. Well, better defend it there than Chasiv Yar. The question is, okay, what area here gives you the greatest tactical advantage in terms of the topography, in terms of heights and rivers, marshes and forests and all that kind of stuff. Chasiv Yar is an interesting place. There's all of the above in that area. Ivanyivska, they have started losing the high ground to the north of there, and that could indeed be a sign of things to come. So it'll be interesting to see whether the Ukrainians are going to put in a concerted effort to maintain control over most of this high ground here. Right, moving further to the south, anyway, we come to Avdiivka, where Andrew Perpetua has some gains for the Russians in the Berditsy area, approaching Berditsy and kind of equalizing the mapping that he has with Deep State map and with Syriac maps. So that's quite often what happens. I sometimes criticize Syriac maps for being overconfident and saying, well, there are Russians here, therefore they control that. But as they're moving forward, that is also often it is actually the case, or sometimes a certain amount of time that is the case, but also it might not be the case when Syriac Maps claims it's a case, but eventually becomes the case. And so he's almost like being prescient. So it doesn't matter if he's overconfident most of the time in these very dynamic areas, because eventually the Russians will take that. It makes a bit of a difference up in places like Sinkivka, where he makes these bold claims and then eventually sometimes walks them back and say, actually, they weren't there, which is what happens in some of these areas. But I think in these areas where it looks a foregone conclusion that the Russians will get up to this river line, that the Ukrainians will lose this eventually. So if he is overconfident in certain areas and is not correct at that moment, it will come. Right. So just to let you know as well that we have the amount of land that the Russians have gained, as according to Andrew Perpetua, is 1.84 square kilometers. So that is, he's the only movement on the entire front line is what you're looking at now on the screen. So that is, I think, hugely significant, because we have Avdiivka, a very dynamic area where the Russians have been really pushing. They've taken a load of ground, and now the Ukrainians have got reinforcements into the area, and B, they are, and seems to be generally accepted now, they've got ammunition. I don't know how much, how much that compares to, say, the height of the counter-offensive, but they do have ammunition coming through, and you are seeing this in the footage that's coming out as well. I have seen more footage of Russian equipment being destroyed by artillery fire than I have done for the last month at least. So that is good news for the Ukrainians. We come down to Pervomaisky, no movement there. No movement in Krasnohorivka, Mariinka, Pobieda, Novomykhailivka, and then down to Velika Novosilka. And interestingly, Robotyne. So Robotyne is a place that has seen a lot of activity over, obviously, for the best part of a year now, or on the way there. And this was where the Ukrainians did the largest, kind of most concerted effort to take in their counteroffensive, and they succeeded in taking, moving past some of the first elements of the Surovikin line. We have the tank ditch here and the Dragon's Teeth as well. Now, Syriac Maps has that now under Russian control. The other mappers don't necessarily agree. So it's interesting to see whether the Ukrainians actually control that trench line. But there's another trench line to the south of Robotyne. Now, Robotyne is this town that the Ukrainians are defending quite well. And the Russians have been losing a tremendous amount of equipment. We've seen some footage over the last 24 hours of the Russians losing a lot of equipment around Vuhledar, interestingly. So they've been hammered. A couple of or a column or so of vehicles there, but also around Robotyne, losing a lot of vehicles. And I thought the Ukrainians wouldn't be holding on to this area so much. I don't see this as that important. I don't think it has incredible intrinsic value, but they are putting up a good fight here. And the Russians have tried to take the town of Robotyne. They tried to take it from the south, the west, the south again, and they're now trying to apparently go around the side of it, come in from the kind of Vobovi direction, and get it much more operationally encircled. There is here a place that, although it looks only on this iteration of the mapping like a simple polygon, I call it the alien's head. And that's because it kind of looks a bit like that. Now, Andrew Perpetua chatted about it on his recent live stream, and we're going to pop into what he says, because this talks to the incredible efforts going on in the area to take places like that. This has swapped hands over the course of the counteroffensive and the Russian offensive. You know, since the first time it was taken, this has swapped hands a number of times, and they're still fighting tooth and nail over it.
I mean, I can show. This is a public image. This is a public image that I just overlaid on my map to make it easier to.
I always call it the alien's head because it's this kind of odd shaped sort of head with two aerials coming out with trenches going, horizontally from those vertical trench lines, and then some others that down below, almost like some kind of big jellyfish with antennae. But there you go.
Geolocate stuff. But this is what the trench system looks like.
So what is the situation there right now? What is manned by Ukraine here? And
it looks like it's all manned by Ukraine. I mean, we see bomber drones attacking it daily.
Yeah, it's all manned, I think. Maybe, well, yeah. So this southern part, the southeast, does occasionally get hit by drones. This eastern part is definitely manned. It has to be because it like links. This northern part, I'm not sure. I don't really care about the northern part personally. And this middle part is definitely. This southern part,
they recently fortified that part with a BMP on top.
yeah. And I'm not sure about this western part. Okay.
Yeah, that's the part I'm also not sure about it.
Yeah, and then this whole trench line is definitely.
Well, any way Ukraine could reinforce those trenches, so that they won't get hammered by FPV drones all the time.
Well, Russia keeps driving BMPs into the trench. Yes. I think there are 2 BMPs stuck there.
Yeah, I think so. I think here, show this footage in a way that doesn't show things I can't show. So this is the overhead cover. It's a BMP3.
Yeah, I just want to say that, like, you see all those sheet metal plates. That's basically the only cover they have in certain areas of the trench system, and that does not protect you well against an FPV.
Yeah, I mean they're further dugouts as well. But I agree. Considering how the trench looked like when Ukraine captured it, it didn't change much since then.
And they go on to talk about how these trench lines, well, they're very difficult when they're so close to the front line and they're being hammered by drones. You're not going to start building up these fortifications. You do that much further back from the zero line. At the contact line, you can't get excavators in. You're not going to be building stuff up. So basically, how you take them, if that stays at the zero line, then that's how they're going to be. Give or take, some smaller modifications to the trenches. They also talked about how some of the Russian trenches are quite cleverly built, like quite downwards and then out and underneath. And in fact, I wonder if I can show you what I mean by that. So imagine that is the trench there, and you basically stand on this mound bit, and you can poke your head out the top. But actually you can get underneath. There are these overhangs underneath, and that gives you safety. And so these are quite cleverly constructed Russian trenches. But what the Ukrainians apparently are doing are using dive bombing drones to go from each side, drop their munitions that then bounce off the sides and then fall down into the cavities. And they do that from both angles, and they use thermobaric munitions to do that then blows out, fundamentally pulverizes that which is inside these trenches. So the Russians have done a pretty good job of building certain trenches, and the Ukrainians are trying to find ways around the defensive qualities of those trenches. But anyway, that's what's going on at this position. The Alien's Head, there are more trench lines here coming out the top, 3 coming out the bottom, and then it is connected under this road to the other trench line here. There are tunnels here as well as trenches, and it's far more extensive than the lines from Brady Efrick's trench marks here. So that, I think, it was interesting to hear that the Ukrainians control all of those, and that would potentially be quite difficult for the Russians to take control of. Right, so that's Robotyne, where there's quite a bit of activity taking place. Although there's no changes to the front lines anywhere else, other than where we saw in the Avdiivka, there are, and that was possibly just catching up mapping. There is some talk about Krinky here. If we go to Flash News, saying Ukrainian soldiers are carrying out measures to strengthen and expand the bridgehead on the left bank of the Dnipro. This is reported by the defense forces of the south of Ukraine. However, the occupiers actively carry out aerial reconnaissance, continue the pressure with artillery, and use a large number of strike drones of various types. So Russians obviously putting a lot of pressure on the Ukrainians, but it's interesting that there are several claims that the Ukrainians are trying to expand that bridgehead. I think that's going to be far too difficult for them to achieve. Here, PS01 says, Krinky, a group of Russians get annihilated. So there's some footage to show FPV drones and munitions working on Russians in the area. And he says the beachhead continues to expand westward. And we have heard this a number of times, that the Ukrainians seem to be able to advance westwards, albeit slowly. But on the flip side, there are claims that the Russians are advancing westwards themselves, but from further to the northeast. So yeah, I wonder if the Ukrainians really are thinking seriously about expanding here. I think that would be incredibly difficult. I wonder whether, as the weather changes and we stop getting frozen river areas, whether that means that traveling across the river will be easier and might help out the Ukrainians somewhat. But I guess we'll see. And then the final thing I'm going to refer to is this from Suriyat Maps, referring to some work by a couple of others. The War of Attrition explained through this image, a huge work by Clement Mollin and Military Summary. Ukrainian troops have been building a huge trench system in the Donbass area under their control, northern Zaporizhia, and in the near future in eastern Dnipropetrovsk. Russia's advance in this area will not be easy or quick. It's impossible for a collapse to happen in this situation. Rather like the flip side, with the Ukrainians saying it's very difficult for them to very quickly, during the counter-offensive, to move on to Tokmak. Going through here when you've got 3 lines of massive defensive fortifications, it was always going to be incredibly difficult. They were never going to advance 30 kilometers a day, which is what General Zaluzhny initially had envisaged. So this is talking to that, but the other way around. The Russia are going to find it equally as difficult, given the size of the fortifications of what the Ukrainians are supposedly building at the moment. Russia's advance in this area will not be easy or quick. It's impossible for a collapse to happen in this situation, as Ukrainian troops will be able to withdraw systematically as the Russian forces advance westwards. As previously mentioned, the Ukrainian collapse will occur, will it, when there is a tipping point in the resource reserves available to the Ukrainian state. And so if we look at this map, you can see that there are starting to be serious trench lines for the Ukrainians right across the eastern front. Zaporizhia has apparently, for some time it's been known that there have been pretty decent Ukrainian trenches there, although it doesn't look as widespread as ones to the east. And it was in the east that they were complaining about, well, actually, if this is to be trusted, then these trench lines seem to be fairly well constructed or fairly extensive. Where Avdiivka is concerned, I guess I'm just trying to work out where Avdiivka is around here. I guess, well, I mean, it looks like there are Or is that down there? There are trench lines there, and maybe they weren't as close to Avdiivka as they were hoping, but certainly moving further back, I wonder if that's Pokrovsk there. Moving further back there are extensive trench lines that have been built. So I guess that's good news for the Ukrainians there. In terms of their preparations going forward. Right, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Not too much information out there today, which is always good at this period of Russian offensive for the Russians to be unable to capitalize, unable to move forward, I think is good news. So long may that last. Anyway, let me know what you think. Take care. Speak soon.